Lesson learned from our last escapade. Make sure you reformat your microphone every time you use it for a new project. Otherwise, you may be crying when you get to the editing room after all of your footage is corrupted for one reason or another. That really is the beauty of filmmaking. There are so many little issues, things that'll pop up, things that'll make you question all of your knowledge, how much of a noob you really are when it comes to doing projects, things like that. So, yeah, I absolutely love it. But then again, you'll find that in a lot of different things, you know? You'll realize when you showed up to the paintball field, you forgot your visor, and it's a rainy day. And trust me, as someone who has only played paintball in the rain once, you don't want to forget your visor. Thankfully, I didn't, but I was tempted to just not bring it. I thought, oh, it won't be a big deal. I'm not going to need it. It's probably not going to rain anyway. Sure enough, you know, it might be sunny in your neck of the woods, but as soon as you get out there to the field, it is just nightmare material. So, really glad I brought that. Preparation is really what we're talking about here. It's the key at the end of the day. Making sure that you're ready for every situation you go into. Mostly ready, or most situations, because, you know, there's plenty of times where maybe you're going to have to improvise, and maybe you just don't get notified until the last minute, which is where your sort of reflex training comes into play. All the stuff that you've practiced over the years of taking classes, gaining experience, things like that, that's when they really begin to matter. Like, for example, with my current job of teaching preschoolers, I definitely find it is a little bit, I'm not going to say a lot, but a little bit more manageable to deal with the kids when I have a plan in place. Mainly because I have a different energy when I have a plan in place. Not so much because we end up being more productive or anything like that, because, I mean, think about it, we're dealing with preschoolers, so the likelihood that they're actually going to learn anything of note from me is pretty low. You know, if I can get one or two kids to grasp a new concept or feel a little bit of confidence with it, then that's a huge win in my book. But for the most part, it's just trying to keep them at bay and make sure the 2 or 3 rascals that are constantly goofing around are not ruining the experience for everyone else. That's sort of what it comes down to. But anyways, I digress. The main thing is, when you have a strategy for what you want to do, and I'm not just going to throw that term out there, because I learned very recently, and you might laugh because this is something that you would normally learn all throughout school, but for whatever reason, this concept never stuck in my head. And it's, if you want to have a good strategy, you have to have a good thesis, okay? A good thesis statement. It's the foundation for literally every intention you'll ever have, okay? Because I think I was sort of born with the brain of, I enjoy the process, I enjoy the action of things, and I don't necessarily have to know why I'm doing them to enjoy them. But the problem is, at some point you're going to experience, it's almost like a tragedy of self. Like, you're going to realize you have no clue what you're doing, and you're going to feel aimless because the action you're doing, as much as you might love it, is going to become so repetitive that eventually that question is going to come up. You know, why am I doing this? Because at the beginning, you're spending a lot of your time, your energy, figuring out how to do the task properly, refining that skill, but eventually it'll become so automatic that you'll have space freed up for other questions, for other things that come up in your head. So I say, personally, figure that out from the get-go, because it's going to come up either way, and you might as well put all of your effort and energy and training and process into something that you actually believe in, right? And most people, I would argue, have no idea. Like, they just have been told a concept that seems good enough because it's too much of a bother to come up with something on their own. And I know I'm kind of throwing that out there a bit, I can't think of the word that I'm thinking of right now. It's not sarcastically, but it's actually really hard to come up with your own ideas. No, seriously, like it's really hard. And I don't mean your own ideas in the sense of being new or innovative. I mean in the sense of knowing what sort of purpose you actually want to have. Like that is surprisingly complex. It may not seem like a big deal. In fact, we foster this mindset all the time that, well, you live in America, you can do whatever you want to do. It's a free country, right? How many times have you heard that? It's a free country. I guess that's more of a 90s, 2000s thing. I'm kind of aging myself with that one. But anyways, the point is, it's so cavalier. That's what I was thinking of. It's so cavalier to consider, I could just do whatever I want. First off, that's not true. You can't do whatever you want. There are so many limitations in place that are either obvious or totally invisible to you that you won't realize are there until you run into them 10 steps into the process, that it is worth carefully considering what it is that you actually want to do. Like it is a bigger deal than you think. And I'll tell you why. Well, actually, I already told you why. What I want to tell you now is how to figure that out. How to figure out what the thing is, okay? And I'm gonna go with the tried and true process, okay? You guys ever heard of the process of elimination? Sorry, these girls are like acting up. I kind of want to go before the light changes. There, okay. You guys ever heard of the process of elimination? So rather than doing things the difficult way, we're gonna do it, as per usual, the counterintuitive way, all right? So normally, what do people say? Find what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. Sounds pretty good, right? But what if I don't know what I love? What if I just have no clue what sort of path I want to take? Well, that's kind of hard. How do I decide? Especially nowadays. I mean, it might have actually been a little bit simpler in days past because most people were presented with a limited pool of options. If you grew up in a small town, maybe it was an industrial town, you could only do a certain set of actions or learn a certain set of skills. And as you present more of those opportunities, then those, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So you're in a small town, you can learn a certain set of actions, right? And it's like, well, I can pick between A, B, or C. That's not a big deal. And if you don't know any better, who cares, right? Those seem like the only things in the world that you could end up practicing anyway. Then you introduce the internet. Suddenly, people are a lot more knowledgeable than they ever have been in human history, right? There's more information available to them than they had access to prior. So what does this cause? Well, creates the dilemma of choice. Have you ever sat down and tried to watch Netflix and you'd think, well, I mean, there's so many movies I could watch here. It should be easy to pick something. Well, I could watch action or I could watch horror. When I'm watching a movie with my girlfriend, oh man, she doesn't like horror. She's more of a rom-com type gal. Maybe I can find something that's in the realm of rom-com that I like that's also action. You see where I'm going with this, okay? Then it becomes an endless struggle of trying to figure out what you actually want to like. Let's say you went hands off. You said, hey, listen, babe, you can pick whatever movie you like. Anything rom-com, go for it. Now what dilemma is she presented with? She can't pick a movie. She doesn't know. It's just as hard. So that's my fantastic analogy for describing how difficult it is to figure out what you love in this day and age, because there's so many things you could do. If I really wanted to, I could stay in my little hometown. I could stay in Long Beach and I could be that's kind of what I ended up doing. I could be an actor, okay? Long Beach is close to LA. So I ended up pursuing the thing that made the most sense for that area, so to speak. Okay, we won't get into the logistics of whether or not that's a practical pursuit, but you get what I'm saying. But the alternative is I could actually learn to be an interpreter who works at an embassy in Baghdad, right? I mean, the possibilities are kind of endless. Now, obviously, I'm not taking into account the fact that I'm not interested in being an ambassador or a translator or an interpreter is what I said originally. There's a lot of elements of what you sort of naturally gravitate towards as a child. There's also what your parents encourage you to do. All of this stuff has an effect ultimately on what you end up doing. But back to the original point, which was process of elimination. Okay, man, I love hearing myself talk. How long did it take for me to get to the main point? So instead of trying to sort out the thing that is most important, what I challenge you to do, and what I've challenged myself to do, is just be open-minded. Do as many things that come my way as possible, and see which ones I actually care about the most. All right? So that means if you get an opportunity to, let's say you're in school still, okay? You're doing extracurriculars, clubs, sports, things like that. If you find that you don't like a sport, and this is actually a real example of someone who I've worked with before. If you commit a certain amount of time to a sport and you find after a while that that's not really your thing anymore, you don't have to keep doing it. It's fine, okay? And listen, I understand there is pressure from parents to keep doing it no matter what. You got to stick it out 4 years, get those credentials, get that item on your resume so that leads to something else in the future. I understand, and also that is kind of one of the flaws with how our education system works, is that it requires extensive commitment to ideas in order for them to hopefully pan out in the long term. But I really don't think it's conducive to everyone's form of learning. I mean, how many people actually know right off the bat what they want to do? And if they do, how many people actually stick to it, right? I think education should be less of a pipeline and more of a sampler. Okay, you guys ever had a charcuterie board? Right, just imagine like 8 feet of cheese. Maybe you aren't a fan of cheese, but I freaking love cheese, okay? Just imagine if you had all the cheeses you could choose from, sort of like a job fair, I guess, but for school, and you were required to do every element of that. And I don't mean in the sense of like, oh, you got to meet your GEs in college, so you take one class here, one class there. I mean, I suppose that could technically qualify, but I mean a committed point. Okay, so maybe the charcuterie notion doesn't work. Maybe a better example would be, so imagine a segmented pipeline, okay? As I contradict myself here. Imagine that for 6 months. Wait, how long is a semester? January, February, March, April, May. So 5 months, okay? 5 months. Imagine for 5 months, you specialize in one skill, okay? In fact, here's how I'm envisioning it. You take the model of a workplace, of an office. We'll say, what would be an example that I know? I'm gonna stick with film because I know film best, okay? So imagine that you work for a production company, and for 4 months, you work as a producer, okay? You are preferably, ideally, a non-creative in this role. And I'm not saying being a producer is not a creative role. I'm just trying to make a distinction here because eventually we're gonna get to being creative, okay? You start off as a producer, and for 4 to 6 months, you only do that, whether you like it or not. Even if you hate it, you have to do that thing, and you are encouraged to give it your very best. And then you get assessed at the very end of the experience, okay? That's another thing too. Having like little assessments throughout is just like, I don't know, it's like having an online ranking system. It just doesn't seem feasible towards actually assessing one's ability. And I understand, like, maybe people generally fall in line of the ranks that they land on in video games, but when it comes to learning skills in a workplace, I don't think any assessment should be made until enough time has passed to actually indicate whether or not it is it's the right fit. Because for a lot of people, and I speak from personal experience, the first impression is not always the best one. Like, you may start doing something and have a hell of a time with it and think this is a total mistake. Like, why am I involved with this at all? But then stick it out and 3 months later realize it was actually one of the best experiences you've ever had. This happened to me with paintball. It happened to me with my job as a teacher. Like, I don't want to be a teacher, man. I was trying to figure out a way to quit in the first 2 weeks that I was working because I didn't think I was cut out to do it. It's now one of my favorite things. It took me years to get to that point. And I'm not even saying we should take years to figure this stuff out. I just think not enough time is spent figuring that out. And when you get assessed too early, it builds a sense of insecurity, I think. And it also builds a false sense of security, okay? How little do you learn when you feel like you're winning all the time, right? If I jump into a ranked game of Overwatch or Valorant or Counter-Strike or Halo or whatever, and I just stomp noobs when I'm like a mid-level, average, mediocre player, what does that tell me? Oh, I'm freaking good. I don't have to improve at all. I'm fantastic. There is nothing of value gained for that. For the other people, there is probably something to be gained, right? They get to assess all the mistakes they made. But for me, I'm not gaining anything from that. So if I'm being told I'm losing too early, well, then I feel really bad about my abilities. But if I'm told I'm winning too early, then I feel too good about them. So I think more emphasis needs to be put on the process of doing things rather than the evaluation, okay? That can come later. In fact, I would argue that the best evaluation of whether or not you are qualified for a position is how secure you feel doing it. You know, the reaction people give you when they see you do your work and you know you're doing a good job. You can't really recreate that unless you do the real thing or you make a game out of it, let's say. You know, you have competitions. It doesn't even have to be competitions against each other. It's like a competition against self. Like, let's say you give everyone a 3-day deadline to accomplish a project, all right? And you don't give them full autonomy. You give them a decent amount of direction, and you'll know right away which people are actually paying attention and which ones aren't, and which ones are tuned in. And that is an indicator of how far they're going. I realize this is like not, I'm just talking about the education system now. Damn it. Okay, how do we make this practical to you? So, if you don't like something, try it for a certain amount of time. Give yourself a very specific deadline. I would say 3 to 6 months is decent, okay? More time would be better, but you know, we don't have all the time in the world. 3 to 6 months, even if you hate it, and after that amount of time, decide if you want to keep going with it. And then don't feel bad if you give up. I did parkour for 5, 6-ish years, and I felt bad that I didn't want to train anymore. I thought something was wrong with me because I used to be obsessed with it. I would watch YouTube videos. I would go out and train by myself in public. I would take classes. I was looking forward to the weekend, looking forward to training. It was my obsession. And then after a while, I just didn't really care anymore. I don't know why. Something switched in my brain. So, don't feel bad if you want to give up on something. That's okay. Sometimes giving up on things is good, especially, oh man, it's a whole other can of worms. Toxic friends. Yeah. That's a really hard one to deal with too, because you never want to give up on people. You always want to try to see the best in others. You would like them to have as much faith in you as you have in them, but sometimes it doesn't work out. And if the person is not progressing, I would say that's probably the number one indicator. If the other person is not progressing and you find that you've reached a different sort of mental state and they are now dragging you, it feels like a dragging motion when a friendship is not working out. Don't be afraid to call it quits and accept the fact that they are going to hold that against you. They're going to resent you. That's not really what's important. What's important is, you're doing your thing, right? And once you reach a certain level of growth, at a certain point, you won't care about that anyway. Like, you'll understand which opinions to value, because there's a very fine balance between not caring what anyone thinks and caring way too much about what everyone thinks, all right? Obviously, some people will say, well, you got to trust the opinions of others because that's sort of what keeps you sane, and you got to get feedback and be open to feedback and be humble, things like that. And then others will say, well, no, I don't care what anyone thinks. I'm going to do my own thing. I got my own ideas, and that's that. But on that end of the spectrum, that's kind of sociopathic behavior. If you don't care what anyone thinks, then why, what are you doing? Are you just lone wolfing all of life? That's not very fun. Human beings were literally evolved to have interaction with each other, to form communities, tribes, socialize. There are so many, listen, for all you health nuts out there, there are so many mental and physical benefits that come just from having a real life conversation with someone. I'm not talking over phone or Discord, okay? As much as I like to do that because it's convenient, I'm talking in real life, the interaction of physically looking at someone and the sound waves of their voice hitting you, not the ones and zeros, their actual sound waves, is profoundly good for you. So you should care what other people think, because you don't want to alienate everyone. But you don't want to alienate the right people. Anyways, that's all I got for today. Have a good one, and I'll see you in the next one.